right, to begin our program this morning, we are going to be speaking about a very, I cannot overemphasize how very important this subject is. It's one of the most divisive subjects that our church is currently facing. And as you've probably seen on your program, we are discussing whether or not the church of God has become Babylon. Is the church Babylon? The suggest that many of you are probably facing similar situations in the church that you're currently in. Whether you like it or not, this subject has affected all of us that are seated here. Many of you are probably here because you're feeling like the church has become Babylon and you're looking for a better place to worship God at. Well, we're going to be discussing those issues today, and hopefully it will be a blessing and you'll get practical steps on what to do when you go back to your local church and how you can be the change that you want to see within your church. Many strange things are happening in our churches today. We have in our churches women that are becoming pastors, even getting to a point where women are baptizing church members, and we don't have any support of seeing a woman in the Bible baptizing anyone. We have the LGBTQ movement creeping into our church to a point where pastors are actually becoming LGBTQ, they are homosexual pastors. And we have the church trying to normalize this thing and move on as though nothing is wrong with it and nothing is happening. Last week we were in Cape Town and we met a lady from Canada, and she was telling us that they are struggling currently with this issue at a church where it's a homosexual pastor and is trying to normalize homosexuality within the Church of God. And I think there was an issue where there was a decree passed that pastors are actually supposed to marry or unite homosexuals. And you just sitting there in church and wondering, where is God and all these things are happening? What is happening in our church? You have our church getting to a point where they are actually restricting our religious liberties, our freedom of conscience. I mean, we have the example of COVID-19, where it's either you vaccinate or you lose your job, right? The church says you must vaccinate. And whenever we try to preach the truth in the church of God, to try and bring that revival and reformation that God wants us to have before he comes, we are sidelined. We are called fanatics, reformers, and all sorts of funny names. And sometimes we're even disfellowshipped. And you're just sitting there and like, but is this really God's church? Am I in the right church? And to top it all up, we have people that are worldly, performing worldly music in our churches, throwing rock concerts within our churches. And as you sit there, you're like, where is God in all of these things? What do we do? Where do we go from here? Is there another church that God wants us to be a part of? Did I maybe join the wrong church? Has the church now become Babylon? We want to discuss these issues today, and by God's grace, we will be able to help one another so that we can have a way forward. Because God does say that he wants a pure church before he comes again. He wants his character to be fully manifested within his church so that he can come. But the state of our church right now doesn't suggest that Christ is coming anytime soon in our current condition. So we need to find a way of how we can help one another to bring that revival and reformation. I'm joined by these gentlemen here, and they will be the ones that will be helping us discuss this issue and understand it much better. On my far left, we have Brother David Simons. He is a Bible teacher here at Purelight Missions. Next to him is Brother Babaluki Moseki. He is also a Bible teacher here at Purelight Missions, and he's a graduate of Purelight Missions, the very first graduate that Purelight Missions had. Next to me on my right, we have Brother Lawrence Swallow, who is currently serving as the president of Purelight Missions, as well as a Bible teacher at this very institution. And on my far right, we have Brother Ashley Chuma, who is also a graduate of Purelight Missions and is currently serving as the principal of a similar school, but focusing on primary school, high school, and creche in KZN called Sanctuary Institute. So these are the gentlemen that will be helping us understand whether the Church of God has now become Babylon. And I'm your host, Tanaka Miracle Chokubudza. I'm a third-year student here at Purelight Missions. Good morning, gentlemen. How are you doing this morning?
We are doing very well.
They seem tense. They know that the subject that we're about to discuss is not an easy one, so they are very careful and, but we pray that God may lead them. The very first question I want to throw on the table that we need to discuss is the church Babylon? If not, is there a point in time where this church is going to become Babylon? Yeah.
We only have one mic. Morning. Happy Sabbath. The question is the church Babylon? We have to first define what is Babylon and who qualifies to be part of Babylon so that we can determine if the church is or is not Babylon. Babylon is a city that is described in Revelation chapter 14, verse 8 as having fallen. And in the book of Revelation 16, verse 13, Babylon is divided into three parts. There is the spiritualism aspect of Babylon, or the paganism aspect, the dragon part. Then you have the apostate Protestantism part, and then you also have the papacy. So you have three parts of the spiritual aspect of Babylon, which basically includes every religious body that claims to worship any kind of body, whether Christian or not Christian. So under the paganism aspect of Babylon, that's where you have the Muslims, the Buddhists, the African traditional religions. All of these are under this body that we call the pagan aspect of Babylon. They are still part of Babylon. And then you have in Protestantism, we say apostate Protestants become part of Babylon. And there's a reason why we have to say that they were not always Babylon, they became Babylon in the 1840s when they rejected the first and the second angel's message. And that becomes very clear when you study that concept. And then you have the papacy that has been called Babylon several times in the Bible, Revelation 17, Revelation 14. So when you look at the biblical picture of who Babylon is, it's a term that the Bible uses to refer to bodies of individuals who have not followed all the counsel the Lord has given them. So the papacy is an example of that. You also have Protestants, an example of that. And the pagan religions have never really chosen to follow God. And there are two things that tie anybody to qualify to be Babylon. The Bible speaks about the wine of Babylon, Revelation 17, verse 5. Babylon has a wine, and wine in the Bible represents deception or heresies that are there. And there are two key heresies that are connected with the system of Babylon. And the first one is immortality of the soul, which says that the dead are not really dead, they are alive one way or the other. These are the people that worship the dead in one way or the other, or they pay due respect to them. The second one, obviously, is Sunday sacredness. So when you look at all of this broader definition of what Babylon includes, and you look at the identifying marks of Babylon is that leaves the Seventh-day Adventist Church out of the league. We don't believe in immortality of the soul. We don't believe in Sunday sacredness. We have not, as a whole collective body of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, completely rejected all the counsel that the Lord has given us. So the answer is the church is not Babylon.
God's church is not Babylon. Before I add a follow-up question to that, I just want Brother David to give us his thoughts.
So, good morning, everyone. And just to develop a little bit what Elder Walker was just saying, when you look at Revelation 17, and you see that the woman has a cup in her hands, and obviously what is contained in a cup is wine. So the wine that the woman has is described as abominations and the filthiness of the fornication. So what is the wine? It's a reference to the abominations that are being taught by and promoted by the system of Babylon. And when you look throughout the Bible, in addition to what Elder Walker said, in addition to sun worship and in addition to spiritualism, there's also righteousness by works, salvation by our own deeds. There's also idolatry. There's also the eating of unclean foods, and And then another very important feature of Babylon is that Babylon is a persecuting power. These are attributes that cannot be attributed in the truest and fullest sense to the Adventist Church. Persecution, some might argue that there is persecution from pastors and administrators against those who preach quote unquote Christian truth. But persecution is an official doctrine of the Roman Catholic Church. And also within the history of the Protestant churches, there was much persecution that happened. And both of these systems, apostate Protestantism as well as Catholicism, have within their doctrines, for the most part, that it is perfectly suitable and appropriate for the church to appeal to the state to basically enforce religious doctrines. And again, this is not something that the Adventist Church officially teaches. It's not something that is in our official statements or doctrines. Um, and then I think, yeah, I think, oh, and then also from Mrs. White, she says very plainly, speaking in Last Day Events, she wrote this in 1893. She said, "My brother, if you are teaching that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is Babylon, you are wrong." So that's pretty plain. And then again in Last Day Events, the Lord has not given you a message to call the Seventh-day Adventists Babylon and to call the people of God to come out of her. And then there are several other quotes that we could refer to. So Last Day Events is a very useful reference book, resource, because she's got a whole litany of statements which clearly shows that the church is not Babylon.
Thank you so much for those extensive definitions and explanations of what Babylon is. I think it's quite clear that our church is not Babylon. From what has been said, it's two things that can make us conclude that the church is Babylon: Sunday sacredness and immortality of the soul. And those things are not being taught now in the greater body of the church. But then the follow-up question is then, we agree that the church as of yet is not Babylon. Is there then a point in time where the church is going to be Babylon, where let's say that the standard laws are now enforced and people are being persecuted for religious liberty? Is the church going to also persecute? Because when we see what happened in COVID-19, the state made a decree that you cannot do certain things unless you're vaccinated, and the church basically didn't fight against that. So when the certain laws are now implemented, will the church then not also partner up with the state and persecute God's people, and then we can conclude that the church is now Babylon? Oh,
So I'm not going to answer the question entirely, but I just wanted to address the point that was made about the vaccine issue. So there is a sermon that was preached by a man called Conrad Vine called An Appeal to Adventist Nobility. And in this sermon, basically what Elder Vine demonstrates is that the so-called official church statement was not actually official. The statement was made and approved by a body within the Adventist Church of AGCOM, and which is a part of our church which has an official role, but its role is not to make such statements as they made. They had no quote-unquote legal right to say what they said. That statement was never authorized, it was never approved, voted on by a general conference, in a general conference session. So it actually has no real authority within the church. So the point that I'm making is that that can't be used as an example of the church. When you say the church, we're actually talking about not just the general conference leadership or some members in ADCOM, we're talking about the body of Seventh-day Adventists at a general conference session, elected representatives unitedly, prayerfully making a decision. That was not done in the case of the vaccine statement.
All right.
So we have to keep that in mind.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much. Good morning. To answer the question, I think this question about whether the church is Babylon or not, it's not just a question that is asked out of the blues. I think people see certain things that are happening that are similar to what is being done by Babylon and being fired at God's people within the God's church. So, and it's easy for someone to conclude that the church is Babylon based on those things. Now, that's a fallacy. It's a fallacious reasoning. It's called a priori reason. Let me give you an example. In Durban, we have Indians, right? The principle is that Indians live in India. That's a principle. The fact is that there are Indians in Durban. A fallacious reasoning would be that therefore Durban is India. You understand what I'm saying? So when we see elements that are found in Babylon being in our church, and then we conclude that the church is Babylon, that's fallacious reasoning. We have to work with facts and principles. As Elder Luago and Elder David did, to look at what makes a body Babylon. Those are the facts. And then you work with the principle from them to say, okay, now, because we don't have these teachings in our church, we don't have the elements that make a body Babylon. Therefore, the church cannot be Babylon. Yes, we have certain elements that are similar to what is found in Babylon, but that does not make us Babylon. And to say, to also add to that, that will it ever become Babylon? When you look at Revelation chapter 2 and chapter 3, it's basically the history of God's church, prophecy, history and prophecy of God's church, from its inception up until the second coming of Christ. We are living in the time of Laodicea. After Laodicea, what comes next? Second coming of Christ. There's not another church. When you look at the church of Thyatira, where during the time of the rise of the papers and all that, and you look at the Reformation, the history of the Reformation, they move from the candlestick will actually pass from one to the next. But with Laodicea, I don't have any threat of the candlestick being passed on to the next. So you would have this in Laodicea in the end times. Those who are faithful, those who overcome, I'm going to read chapter 3, verse 20 and 21. They become part of the church triumphant and then they move on. The next epoch being the second coming of Christ and being glorified in all that. And those who reject to move on with the counsel of the Lord, they will fall off and join Babylon. So there's never a point when the church will become Babylon. I think we also need to understand it and define what the church is, but I think we'll move on to that in the next.
Thank you so much. I think Brother Babuluki put a nail to the coffin by that statement. And there's also a teaching, but I think he partially answered it. There's a teaching that goes on to say that when you study Revelation chapter 12, you have the pure church of God. And this pure church gets into the wilderness and then it comes out in Revelation 17 as Babylon. I don't know if you've ever heard of that kind of teaching before, but if you have not, maybe someone can just clarify that misunderstanding and we can easily move on, Brother Ashley.
That is our question. All right, so the question is, is the woman in Revelation chapter 12 going to be, is the same woman that we find in Revelation chapter 18? All right, I think that's not the case, because in Revelation chapter 12, you see the woman is the one that gives birth to the man child, which is Jesus Christ. And that woman goes through from the days of the apostles, that's Revelation from AD 31, the Apostolic Church, down through Revelation chapter 12, verse 17, because we hear when the Bible says, and the dragon was with the woman. So the woman is still there just before the end of time. Now in Revelation chapter 17, you have a woman who is a mother of harlots. So this woman is the main church that has given birth to many other churches. And I don't see the Adventist church becoming a mother of harlots. I don't see it controlling kings and governments and political economic entities. So those two cannot be merged, and those are slightly different prophecies. It's a repeat and enlarge, but I think we're going to delve more into that.
Thank you so much, Brother David. Do you have a comment?
What you find in Revelation 12, in verse 1, the appearance of the woman is symbolic of the experience of God's people. It describes her as being clothed in the sun, a reference to her being experiencing the righteousness of Christ, and also being a commander and leading people, and then also having the 12 stars, the crown of 12 stars, in reference to this church being founded upon the teachings of both the 12 patriarchs, the Old Testament, and then also the 12 apostles, the writings of the New Testament, and standing on their leadership, and then also, especially standing on the movie of reference to them being founded on the teachings of these leaders, and the reference to the writings of the prophets and apostles. And then, so in essence, what you have in verse 1 is you have God's people keeping the commandments, experiencing the righteousness of Christ, and having the testimony of the prophets, the writings of the prophets. Verse 17 shows you that you see the woman now and the remnant of the seed, the descendants also having the faith, having the commandments of God, keeping the commandments of God, and having the testimony of Jesus. What I'm basically trying to say is, in verse 1, you have the keeping of the commandments and the testimony of Jesus, and in verse 17, the same thing. That is a style of writing in Hebrew poetry and in Hebrew and in biblical prophetic writings that tells you that essentially everything in between is referring to the same movement. So in other words, verse 1 all the way down to verse 17 is a continuation of the same entity. There's no change that takes place there. Now you do see the woman going into the wilderness, and in the wilderness, she's followed into the wilderness. She doesn't go into the wilderness alone. There is a serpent that follows her, that tries to destroy her, which we know to be a reference at that point to the Roman Catholic Church, which is seeking to destroy. So when you look at Revelation 17, you find a woman, the symbolism of which is being clothed in scarlet and purple, which is a reference to her rebellion against God's law. And then, as I mentioned, she has a cup in her hand while she is in the wilderness, and in that cup is blood, the blood of the saints. So who is that? That must be the serpent that followed the woman into the wilderness. Right? That, in other words, it's different imagery speaking about the same thing. It's the enemy of God's people. Now, what's also interesting is that imagery of Babylon being called a harlot is Old Testament imagery referring to ancient Israel when they went into apostasy. So, in essence, the woman, there are two women. There is one in Revelation 12 that has remained faithful, that has not always been visible, has not always been prominent, but has always remained faithful to God. God has always had those people. And in Revelation 17, you see this prominent figure that has worldwide global influence. And this is a woman, this is a church, in other words, that has gone into apostasy. That instead of relying upon God, it has relied on state power. And it has allowed the world and its teachings and its philosophies to influence its doctrines. So again, the point is that when you study the symbolism carefully and when you follow the context, you'll see that the woman in Revelation 17 is the same entity referred to as the dragon in verse 6, as well as in verses, I think it's 12 to or 14 to 16 or somewhere around there.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I hope you're really following. We might not be able to discuss these issues in depth, but we will have a Q&A later on. So I really do encourage you that you send in your questions where you think that we haven't clarified. Please send in your questions and we will try and answer them. So now we are understanding that the church is not Babylon. The church will not become Babylon. If you disagree, please write your comments, your questions. Also to our online audience, if you are listening, write in your comments or your questions in our comment section below, and we will try our best to answer your questions. The church is not Babylon, but now the question is, the church is in a Laodicean state, right, as Brother Blue mentioned, and this Laodicean state looks similar to what Babylon is like. Why is God allowing his church to go through so many things? Because in the process of the church becoming the way it is now, many souls are actually being lost from the truth because of the state of the church. If God loves his church so much, why is allowing these things to take place within his very church?
I believe from scripture, I think that's 1 Corinthians chapter 11. We can open our Bibles there. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 19. The Bible says, "For there must be also heresies among you, that they which are approved may be made manifest among you. So the reason why we find the church in such a state is because God allows it so that those that are approved, those that study to be approved of God, may be made manifest. So if you, most people that get carried away, most of the time it's because they don't spend time with their Bibles, they don't understand what they stand for, they don't understand what the church stands for, and hence they get swept away by the winds of doctrine. And secondly, I would like to state that this is part of the shaking. Those who are not studying their Bibles, those who are not praying and seeking to do God's will fully, are going to be. Okay, can you hear me? All right, so those are the people that will be swept away by the winds of doctrine. So the reason why this happens now is to show who are the true children of God.
These are serious questions that sometimes, if you haven't experienced, you may take them very lightly. And when you experience the apostasy, the persecution in the church, it may lead you to doubt whether this is really God's church. And it may lead you to even ask questions about why is God allowing it to happen? God has allowed it to happen. And he has predicted that this is going to happen. He foresaw it, and he has allowed this to happen, like Brother Ashley is saying, as a way of the shaking period that needs to happen in the church. And this is a very important part. And let me explain what I mean by this. There is a lot of professed Christians that profess to be sincere in the church. And God has a plan to purify his church. It's not like he's just allowing things to go without purifying them. And the process that God has chosen to purify his church is called the shaking. God is going to shake the church, and this is not an Adventist new thing that's happening. It happened with ancient Israel. God shook Israel during the time when Israel was in deep apostasy. And let me just mention this, that Brother Babuluki, that one of the reasons why we say the church can never become Babylon is because Israel was never Babylon in the Old Testament. And when you look at the God's church in the New Testament, God said there will be apostasy within the church. And Laodicea is telling us that we are actually, what we see in the churches is a fulfillment of prophecy. The rock music, the homosexual agenda, all of that. We actually expect to see that because prophecy says it is. I'm not justifying it. All I'm saying is, if I was to direct you to identify a lady and pick her up, let me rather say a man, pick him up at Park Station because it's a dangerous place. Let me pick a man. And I tell you that the man is tall. And the man is very obese and is wearing a tight top and short jeans. And he has earrings and a nose ring. When I describe and give you those identifying marks, am I condoning the behavior of that man?
No.
No. So God has given us a description of his church. He has told us that this is the condition of the church. The church will have this history, Revelation 10. The church will have an apostate condition, Revelation chapter 3. The church will actually be a continuation of the Protestant Reformation, Revelation chapter 12. These are the identifying marks. And this is the message that the church will teach, Revelation 14. So when you take all those 4 chapters, you go to Revelation 14, are they preaching the 3 angels' messages? Yes. What kind of spiritual condition do you find when you go to a local church? According to Bible prophecy, God's true church has to be in a Laodicean state. You understand what I'm saying? So it is a way in which we can identify. I'm not trying to excuse or condemn the Laodicean state of the church, but I'm just trying to help you understand that it's one of the identifying marks of the end time church, that it will be in a Laodicean state. So when it's in a Laodicean state, it's actually the truth that it's actually the true church. It's not a reason to live it. And God has a reason. And one of the reasons is that you have heresies being introduced. And why does God allow heresies to come? I mean, why is the church in the state that it's in? Number one is because of the new theology that teaches that you can never overcome sin. The lack of clarity on music guidelines that basically says you can dance in church, you can do any kind of music, music is amoral. All of these ideologies that is even coming to South Africa now, the Africanism ideology, all of this is coming in and they're saying, let's shackle off the colonial chains and let's worship God according to the dictates of our impulses as Africans. In Africa, when we worship, we dance. We have to move so that we can feel the spirit. But remember that that spirit you are feeling is not of God. You were delivered from it, so you can't bring the spirit back into the church. So God allows all of these things to happen as a way of shaking. He says, these surface readers that are anchored nowhere will be swept away by the heresies that are going to come. So the apostate condition of the church is actually part of God's test of who will be faithful. And also to prepare the few who are righteous in the church for the future persecution. Remember that the church was in apostasy during the time when Christ was on earth. And the few people who were faithful went through emotional and social persecution before they went through physical persecution. So the apostate condition of the church is actually preparing the righteous for the coming crisis. So there is a purpose and a reason of the apostasy that we find here. We are not excusing it, but God has condoned it for many reasons.
Thank you so much. You have a comment?
Yes, just to add on that, that God allows that, and there's a promise in the Bible, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. There's no temptation that comes to us physically. And basically the verse says that, but with the temptation, God will bring a way out of that. So when God allows these things to happen, it's not like he's just allowing it, to run uncontrolled and all that. He has sufficient power to preserve those who are sincere and want to go through and not be affected in a negative sense by the apostasy, to go through it and overcome it. So that I think that's the promise that we can get from all this, because apostasy is there. We cannot run away from that. We cannot justify it, as Brother Rob was saying. But God provides power sufficient to help us float or not be affected by the apostasy.
So from what these gentlemen are saying, are you telling me that if I see that there's apostasy in the church is not in the condition that it's supposed to be in, and I decide to excuse myself, does that mean I'm basically shaking myself out of the church?
Yes, you are removing yourself. I think we are going to get into the definition of the church. What is the church and things like that. But it is important to understand that God has permitted apostasy to come into the church to test all of us, both the righteous and the tares, the wheat and the tares, the good wheats and the tares. And the servants came to the master of the field and said, let's remove the tares. Let's purify the church. Let's clean up everyone that I see as a tare. And the problem, according to the parable, is the master said, in trying to remove the tare, you may also remove the truth. And some people may look like genuine Christians, but they are beating their wives at home. They are watching pornography at night. They are doing all of these kinds of things. But outside, when you look at him, you say, this is a rich wheat. This one, heaven is his. And then you may look at someone else whose dress is not up to par and their diet is not up to par. But that person's heart is in the right place. So if you were to be the one who decides who is the tare and who is the wheat, you will have a problem. So leave that to God. Leave that to God and let the Lord do it.
Amen.
Thank you so much. I see we have many people joining our discussion. For those that are just coming in, let me just tell you that we are discussing the subject called, Is the Church Babylon? That's what we are speaking about right now. And should you have any questions and you want more clarity, there's a question and answer box at the back with notes on the side. So simply just write your questions down and we'll have a Q&A later on where we'll try and answer the confusion that you might be having. I think what we have discussed so far has really gotten us to a point where we are understanding things a little bit better. And from these explanations, I think you can actually make good decisions or well-informed decisions based on the information that you have received so far. If you are, please do take notes so that you can really go back and study these things and be grounded. One thing that's going to shake people out is having a superficial understanding of the truth. So that's why the Bible says, study to show yourself approved to God, not to your fellow neighbor, right? So we really need to study. Many people are being shaken out of the church because they believe the church is Babylon. Why? Because they have a superficial understanding of what constitutes Babylon. So sometimes when you study Babylon too much, also you become part of Babylon because you're focusing on the wrong things and you lose sight of the Savior. But now we're going to get deeper into our study. Now I think we're going to come home to the current situations that we might be facing within our local churches today. But before we get there, I just want us to differentiate between the two. Is there a difference between the organizational structure of the church, the general conference, and the church? So in other words, what is the church? What is the general conference? And how do these two, if it's different, how do we harmonize the two? Brother David.
Okay. So I'm only going to partially answer the question. When I did a word study throughout the Bible, especially in the New Testament, I looked up the word church, and I never once found it to refer to anything other than a group of believers. So it was just a reference to people who had gathered together, who were worshiping Christ in various settings. And so it was not in any way a reference to like a building or some kind of organizational structure or anything like that. However, organization is definitely a tool, an instrument, a means that God has used. He himself ordained it in his church to maintain order within the church. So anyway, that's all I'll say in regards to the church.
So you're saying there's a difference between the church and the organizational structure?
Yes, the organizational structure is a function of the church.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. Let's get deeper into this.
Okay.
Brother Blue, it looks like you have something to say.
All right. There's what we call mater fidelium. That's the church is an organization. Now, the church is an organization can it has a policy, it has offices, a structure, and how things are run because the administration. So there is that. And then the church as an organization can have its own voice on issues. It can make investments. For example, the Seventh Adventist Church denomination, I think it has about 15 billion US dollars, the top 10 richest denominations in the world. So the church can do that. You have that aspect. And then the primary one is mater coetus, or the church is an organism, a group of believers with a set of beliefs that they subscribe to. And this is very important. The church as an organism, the one that Brother David just talked about, precedes the church as an organization. For example, before 1863, did we have a church? Yes. But we didn't have a structure, an organization. You understand what I'm saying? So the church, most of the time, we understand it as an organization. But we must understand it as a group of believers, as an organism. That is what the church is. God has a group of people who believe his truth and they constitute his church. Yes, the structure is its own place. It's a tool of the church. It's a human construct, as it were. I mean, even when they organized in 1863, they had to choose what kind of government structure we're going to adopt. We're going to adopt Presbyterianism. We're going to adopt Congregationalism or the representative form of government. They had to choose, and that is a human construct. But the church basically is a group of believers with a set of beliefs that they all subscribe to.
Yes, I think just to chip in there as well, when you look at the church of God in the Bible, you look at the book of Genesis, what was God's church there in the book of Genesis? It was the family of Adam, the family of Noah, the family of Abraham, the family of Melchizedek, the family of Isaac. All these families, all of them were God's church. The church of God was not one denomination in the sense, if you understand what I'm saying. It grew into a clear denomination when God called the children of Israel from Egypt. And he organized them. That's where the organizational structure took place by Mount Sinai. And that's where the Levitical organizational structure was taking place, where God now said, okay, this is the priests, this is the Levites. When you take your tithe, now take it to the Levites, let them be sustained. An organizational structure was only established in the book of Exodus. It never existed in Genesis, but God had a church then. And during the time when you come to the time of persecution, especially when God's church was now captured in Babylon, the organizational structure of the church did not exist. What existed is the church of God. Under persecution, that's what happens. So you come to the Dark Ages. During the Dark Ages, did we have an organizational structure? What was God's church then? There was no organizational structure. You had the Waldenses, the Albigenses, the French Huguenots, and these faithful God's people that were scattered all over the world that followed the counsels that God had given, and they were not like one visible denomination. In the book of Revelation chapter 12, the woman was in the wilderness, and there was no organizational structure. Now we come to Revelation chapter 10, where now God begins establishing a denomination since 1844. From the Millerite movement, God starts now grouping people together and reviving the old truths he has given them. And then in 1863, he gives them an organizational structure. Why did God give the church an organizational structure? It was for the purposes of mission. Ellen White tells us in Acts of the Apostles, the church was organized for service. The organizational structure was there to facilitate effective mission work, and also proper remuneration, and also a right to ownership of property. So, and this organizational structure existed under God's guidance. Ellen White was given visions that the church needed to have an organization, an organizational structure. And so we cannot now say the organizational structure itself is the church. When the church pre-existed organizational structure. You understand what I'm saying? This organizational structure is what the Bible terms the fold. So in the Bible, you have two concepts. You have the flock and the fold, or in African setting. Let me not use the old English term. You have the kraal, and then you have the fold. You understand that one, right? There's a kraal, and the kraal is where you keep your cows. That's where you keep your goats. That's where you keep your donkeys, your horses. And why do people keep those animals in kraals? It's because you want to protect them. You want to mark who belongs to your animals and who doesn't. That's where you put an imprint of your ownership in them. And that's where you treat their diseases. That's where you help them multiply. And that's how you, when you buy other animals, you bring them to the kraal. It's a way of identifying what belongs to you as the farmer. So in the Bible, you have this concept of the flock of God, and then you have the fold of God, the kraal. And this kraal is what is the organizational structure, if you understand what I'm saying. This kraal is the organizational structure that determines who is really part of the fold of God. And inside this organizational structure, after the Lord has established this kraal, the organizational structure, he is the one that gives the sheep, us, food to eat. And that food is the set of doctrine, a system of truth that nourishes the flock and attends to their individual needs, and appoints shepherds. And it says, okay, this one, I'm going to hire him to take care of my flock and take care of this portion of the flock and this portion of the flock, so that you have only one flock and one fold. We are not saying that only the animals inside this kraal are God's people. The Bible tells us that there are other sheep that I have that are not of this kraal. What should happen to those sheep? Should they stay outside the kraal? No. What does he say? I must also bring them where? Into the kraal. Because in the kraal, there's safety. In the kraal, God has provided to sustain, maintain, feed, and keep the church going. So the organization has a purpose, and that purpose is salvific and salvational. It helps to protect us from deviating and becoming predators. Praise to marauders. And God has a way of protecting us in this structure that we call the Seventh-day Adventist Church organization.
Thank you so much for that, Brother Ashley.
Oh, I just wanted to give verses to what Brother Loho was speaking on. The first one you find in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 23, that anyone who is written in heaven is part of the church of God. You also have Revelation chapter 18, I believe it's verse 3 and 4, where it says, "Come out of here, my people." So there are people that are outside that need to be called into the fold. They are still part of God's church because God's church is a body, but they are not in the organization. And we also have John chapter 10 that he used to illustrate his point. So those are the three verses I would like to share with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for bringing up those verses because it actually leads me to our next point of discussion that I want us to look into. Now we have this fold or this scroll, right, which is representing the organizational structure of the church. And we have the church. We understand that these are two separate entities, but they cannot work independent of one another. They need to work together in order to fulfill the mission that God has given to his church. Now, how do we then bring upon the balance where we look at the shepherds that are managing the crawl, the fold that God has given, but these shepherds are not feeding the flock. In fact, like the Bible says, they are scattering the sheep. They are robbing, like I think it's Ezekiel chapter 34 that speaks about how the shepherds are actually depriving the sheep from the spiritual nourishment that they have. Bring it into our day. Our church leaders, not all of them, are simply sometimes not following what God wants us to do. So, how then do we relate with our church leadership when they are not doing it, thus saith the Lord? Yes, sir.
There's the issue of submission and respecting them. When you look at the command to respect in the Bible, whether it's children to their parents, whether it's wives submitting to their husband, it's not conditional. Just as the command to love is not conditional in the Bible. So there is that aspect. And you see this clearly in the life of David. David was persecuted by Saul. Saul wanted to kill him. But every time when he had a chance to kill him, David to kill him before Saul could kill him, like, I should not touch the anointed of the Lord. So there is that aspect, and Christ gives us a counsel in Matthew chapter 23 that, he's speaking of the Sadducees and the Pharisees, that they sit in the seat of Moses. Whatsoever they say, and I think Brother Asian will balance this, do that, but don't do as they do. I think it speaks volumes there. So there is that aspect that when they say things that are not against God's will, follow them. Respect their office. The fact that he is an elder, the fact that he's a pastor, regardless of his character, respect him because he is in that position that God acknowledges. If he's doing stuff that is wrong and he's not treating you well, that is a matter between him and God. God will sort him out. Don't try to sort him out yourself and by yourself. Just like we see David's example. He said, I cannot touch the Lord's anointed. Yes, he's persecuting me. I'd rather run around rather than avenge myself. Even if I had like more than two chances, or more than one chances to do that. So I think that's how we should relate to them.
Brother Ashley, I heard you're going to bring the balance.
I think he's already brought the balance, but I would like to share a text in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 1, that says, "Rebuke not an elder, but entreat him as a father, and the younger men as brethren." I think what he has spoken on or about in terms of the church respecting the leadership in the Lord, that is, if they go against the counsel of God, they go against clearly stated biblical principles, you are not obliged or obligated to do as they say. So there's nothing more that I can add. I think he has said a mouthful.
Yes, Brother David.
I think there's from the Bible, like from even famously from the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You may remember that the king asked, like, gave them another chance, as it were, to bow down to the idol, and their response was something along the lines of, let me actually read it because my memory is failing me right now. Verse 16 of Daniel 3, it says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. Now, that has been interpreted by some as them saying, like, we're not going to listen to you, um, like, we don't care what you think, or something like that. Like, this almost like obnoxious attitude. But when you look at I think it's Aramaic, when you look at the original language, the wording that they used was actually a respectful tone. It's kind of like how when people read, when Jesus says, woman, what have I to do with thee? They're like, what in the world if I said that to my mother? But Jesus was actually using something which was the most respectful way of referring to your mother or the woman. So in other words, when we read these statements, we read into them our own cultural understanding of it, or we read into it based on how we understand the English. But when you actually when you understand the cultural background, when you understand the original language, you'll understand that Jesus was very respectful. When Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they stood firmly. Nebuchadnezzar was clear it was clear in his mind, these men are not going to bow down to my idol, but they were still very respectful. And even when Nebuchadnezzar later asked or told them to come out, they came out and they listened. They could have said, no, we enjoyed in here, it's nice in here, right? That they came out at the command of the king. So the point is that if I was to try and simplify what I'm saying, you can disagree without being disrespectful.
Yeah.
You can still maintain Christian kindness with people who are disrespectful to you or who are speaking error and heresy. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you will always sound nice, if you know what I mean. It's a bit difficult to explain exactly what I'm trying to say. But if you are, for example, talking about, let's say you have church leaders who are saying that abortion is okay, and you know exactly what abortion is, you probably will be a bit emotional, at least a little bit, because in your mind, it's like these are children that are being killed, and you're saying that this is okay, and it's in the name of Jesus that you're saying that this is okay. That's not okay, right? So the point I'm making is that you won't necessarily be like soft and quiet in your response, but you shouldn't become overheated. You should still show dignity and respect to the people that you are speaking to.
Yeah, just to add on to that, respect is very important, but there's more to it. The question is, how did Christ relate to the apostate leaders in his time? When he began preaching, did he say, all of you are teaching heresy? You are all children of the devil, and that's where you're going to go and burn right in hellfire. So Christ took 3.5 years correcting the theology of the scribes and Pharisees. Sometimes in a very indirect approach, using parables, performing miracles, healing their relatives, until they could see the truthfulness of what he has. And even some of the church leaders sent spies to come and watch him so that they could catch him in his own words. In other words, they wanted to entangle him in his speech. They wanted to drive him to a point where he will say something that will lead them to have a reason to fight him. And Christ gave them no reason to fight him. He was very tactful, never compromised principle, very respectful, very loving. And what was the result of his ministry? Even after they crucified him on the cross, when he resurrected, he said to the disciples, wait here in Jerusalem and receive the Holy Spirit and begin here in Jerusalem. I'm not giving up on this church. And many of the church leaders, some of the scribes and Pharisees, because of Christ's attitude and his method of labor, ended up receiving the truth. Some of the church leaders have no idea what is the truth you have.
Yeah.
And your attitude and your spirit can drive them far from God. So when you manifest the Christ-like spirit, and instead of telling him, I know where you studied, Helderberg, that one, you went there to drink in the hot pot of Babylon. That's why you have a big tummy like this. I know you eat meat. You are even disqualified to even stand up here before us. You are a meat eater, you watch movies, you are sleeping here with people, you should just sit down here and listen. That kind of spirit is not Christ-like. You are fighting God's battles with carnal weapons. And as a result, you are becoming an obstacle to your progress and shutting doors before the time is coming. So tact and good judgment will increase our usefulness and effectiveness in ministry. I'm not against direct rebukes, but I'm against untactful, disrespectful, Christ-like, and let me say in quote, diabolical schemes that we try and use and justify them in the name of we are fighting for the truth. Because that has caused a lot of blockage. And people, some of them will say, I'm going to eat meat until you die yourself. I'm going to fix you.
Yeah.
And the spirit, that spirit is not the spirit of God. We need to manifest Christ-like disposition so that we may be more successful. And others will say, Christ was a compromiser. He's sitting with sinners. Sinners, when you sit with him, you say, my sister, you see how short your skirt is? And these were Jews. Are you wearing a earring? Why did you sleep with that man yesterday? But sinners to be loved, love the company of Jesus. Because in his presence, they were challenged to be more holy, but they were never publicly embarrassed in his presence. It was heaven to be in the presence of Christ. So I think what we need to learn more is to have the Christ-like tact as we share the Christ method. We like saying, well, Jesus rebuked them in Matthew 23, but listen, when did Matthew 3, when was it written? At what time period in Christ's life? At the end of his ministry. It was spoken not in a disrespectful, proud manner. There were tears in his voice as he said these words. They would say, this man has a burden for our salvation. He is not here to embarrass us before the people. So the spirit and the attitude you have will actually win the pastor or cause the pastor to show you who is really in control. And generally, they will show you who is really in control. And you will generally lose the battle. And most of the time, lose the church members and also lose your membership.
Thank you. So he's stepping on toes right now. He's stepping on toes. But we are getting there. We are still gonna get a bit deeper because we really need to understand these things. And I like the point that you brought across that there's a reason why Matthew 24 is at the end of the ministry, not at the beginning.
Yeah.
If you put Matthew 24 at Matthew 5, Matthew 23 at Matthew chapter 5, Jesus would have 2 weeks of ministry. Finished. So I think the truths that we know as people that are studying should lead us to the character of Christ. And when we have the character of Christ, we go to the church which is so-called in apostasy, and they'll see Christ in us, and the problem is solved. So it depends on you. When you know the truth, guess what? Practice what you know, and it will be like Jesus. Now, let's get a bit deeper. I understand what you guys are saying about respecting leaders and all these things. Very good and very well. But why can't I just, get my friends in church who I'm studying with, right, who believe the same things I believe, and we just go and have our church somewhere else, just us who know the present truth, as we like to call it. Leave these people doing their things, because I'm tired of sitting in church where I know the elder is busy fornicating and is coming and making announcements in church. I know the pastor is not living the way he's supposed to be living. And every Sabbath I'm sitting under this man. I'm tired of this. Why can't I just take my friends and we go and start our own company down the road where we're just going to preach present truth every Sabbath? Go.
I like to attempt that. That's a very great temptation, by the way, to do that. Like Puritans. We are Puritans. Let's get fellow Puritans and do this and separate ourselves from that. So it has this annotation of being separatists. And as Roa was saying earlier on, the Laodicean state is one of the identifying marks of God's church. It's like we are trying to run away from the Laodicean state, using carnal weapons rather than allowing Christ to come into our hearts. And this is the same Christ who could share the synagogue with the Pharisees, who could sit in the same place with church leaders who slept with that woman whom they wanted to stone. It's the same Christ. He not say, well, let me just separate myself from that. And beyond that, even we ourselves, I mean, those who think of themselves as Puritans, they wrong God. They sin against God. God doesn't say, okay, now I leave you and I'm separating myself from you. He's still appealing to us. So, and we actually even make the church to suffer, because now our presence could make a positive difference when we are there, commenting, teaching, lovingly and prayerfully. When we separate ourselves from that, then we are being selfish with what God has given us. And we cause the rest of the church members, and God will look upon us as people who are selfish, who are not fit to be part of his kingdom. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Before any of you add on to that, I hear you and I agree with you. But even the Bible says in Matthew chapter 18, verse 20, where 2 or 3 are gathered, that implies inclusivity of those that have the same mindset, because you generally, the greater multitude is not going to agree. So where 2 or 3, these are the ones that have received special light from God. Where they are gathered, guess what? I'm there in the midst of them. So we can start our own companies of present truth believing brethren apart from these ones. Because look, man, influence is really great. The more I'm in the presence of these brethren that are doing these things, the more I shall almost become like them. So I want to, maintain this pure state that I'm trying to have with Christ, apart from the others that are not so pure like myself. Yeah, please.
I guess the context of Matthew 18 was resolving conflicts. It's not necessarily, unless maybe someone may correct me on that, but the context there was, if your brother wrongs you, call the elder, call the second person, call the third person. Let's resolve conflicts. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, and in the context there, it wasn't resolving those conflicts. I am there. It wasn't in the sense of separate yourself, go have your own small synagogue, and when you 2 or both of you or with another person, then I'll be there. The principle can be carried to say, if let's say in this place there are only 3 of you that are Adventists, and you just decide to gather and worship, God will be there. But I think it may not be appropriate for 3 or 4 of you at church to say, let's separate ourselves, because God says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I'll be there. I think to separate ourselves from a church using that text, it's a bit unfair on the text.
I also want to give other examples that we have seen globally. There are churches where there's rock music playing in the Adventist church for 2-3 hours in the morning. When Sabbath school, you get into church. The leaders who are leading out in song service, most of them are wearing pants with skinny jeans, some of them hot pants. I'm talking about things I've witnessed in the US, and the earrings, and the pastor is there with his jeans. It's on Sabbath with a t-shirt or even a vest with tattoos, and is on the guitar. And the music is so loud as you hear in a bar. And you are a member in that church and you have little children. You don't usually listen to that music. What we are saying is not that you should force yourself to stay in an environment with unholy influences. There is a place for you to look for a better church that can accommodate your situation. Even if you may need to drive a distance further, it may help you on that. You can propose to set up a Sabbath school branch in an entered area of the same church. and then get there and do more evangelism. There are many ways of working around that. I think what we are speaking against is now for you to leave the whole organizational structure and set up your own organizational structure and basically register a new church and say, no, at least here, I'm now in full control. I'm able now to preach the truth in its purity. And there are challenges. I think we're going to be discussing that. So there's a place to relocate where it's really unhealthy for your spiritual growth. It's not a sin to relocate to another place, or even go to a place where you can do more evangelism, and set up a Sabbath school branch.
Yeah.
And pastors usually like more membership. So if you say, Pastor, I noticed that in this area, you don't have a church. I want to just share the gospel there with the people. And I want to pass BOP there and share with them so that we have more people. It's easy for them to say, no, you can go. Because some of them are doing that to irritate you. They know what you believe, and some of them will dance like they have done, coming to you to dance in front of you. And on Sabbath morning, they are going up and down, shaking their bodies. And this has happened. And in some cases, some of these churches were preached in the US, where some of these people will really want you to stand up. And if you sit quietly, they don't want it. You irritate them by sitting quietly. So there are those extreme situations that will really test us. But God has there are options that exist other than setting up your own independent church.
Thank you so much. Again, I know you are probably burning right now and you want to ask a few questions. Because of our time, we cannot be able to open this platform up for you to ask your questions. So there's a box at the back. Please write down your questions so that when we do sit down for a Q&A, we are able to then answer these questions. Also, so that the people that will be answering can actually have a bit more time to look at the question and give you an answer that is full of information so that you can take it and take it home. I hear what the brethren are saying again. Yes, I should not completely separate myself. I should try and, find a better solution than separation. But then, how do we address then the issue of apostasy in the church? Because now it's like we just need to submit and do whatever we can. But then, how do we go about actually addressing these things? I'm not happy with my pastor, right? And me leaving and going to a better place where that pastor is not there is going to leave other people in the same situation. How do we address these issues? Yes, sir.
All right. When you look at the Old Testament, whenever there was an apostasy, what brought about a reform was the rediscovery of truths and them being taught in Israel. You see that with Josiah's reforms and many other reforms of other people throughout the reign of Judah, Judah's kings, and also when you look at, we take that, adopt that into the church, find a way of teaching the truth. Do it in a loving, tactfully. Tactfully, you do it prayerfully. You want to educate the people. When people are doing some things, most of them sometimes they are that clueless that they are doing something that is wrong. So be patient with the people, show them clearly from scripture that these are the principles maybe guiding music. These are the principles about ecclesiology and all that. If you need to do a series, do a series. Just one Bible study on a Sabbath afternoon won't suffice. And in my experience, what you'd find is that there are people who were genuinely deceived. They didn't know about such things. And they'll start seeing things in a different way. And they'll start actually saying, let's adopt this in our local church. So it just shows that not everyone who's doing things that are regarded as apostasy, they're doing it out of rebellion. They want to fix someone, they want to fix God. Some of them are beguiled into it. So we have to do our responsibility of teaching them. And I think when push comes to shove, where now they clearly reject it and they are being persecuted. Christ said in Matthew chapter 10, verse 23, move to the next town. As Lord was saying, establish maybe a branch, a Sabbath school branch. Talk to the leadership. Let's expand, and they like that. So that's one way of doing it.
It's very also important to add on to this that most present truth people I've seen globally don't want to be in church office. They say, this church that does this thing. You are a deacon? No, never. In this church. Until you guys learn to be serious. I can't. You are lower. You need to raise the standard. So what we're actually doing is arming and giving power to people that don't know this truth. And they are trying their best to do what they want to do there. And then we sit and condemn it. So it's important that we need to study the Bible. It is also important that when the church requests you to serve. And be a church board member. Be a voice that can influence change.
Yeah.
Be a voice that can initiate change. If you are a Sabbath school superintendent, you are the one now in control of who's going to do Sabbath school or not, who teaches and how they teach. If you are a church elder, you are able to exert an influence that will help redirect the direction of the church. Church pastors are also there, and usually the conference works with church leaders in a local church when they are sending a pastor there. So if you refrain from church office as a way of fixing them because of their rebellion, the situation doesn't really improve.
Yeah.
Because some of the church elders can't give Bible studies. So you are expecting them to do something they can't. That's why they're angry. When you say, where are the Bible studies? They say, you condemn everything in this church. That this person can't give a Bible study. So you are able, and as a church leader, you can be elected to be the executive, a member of the executive committee of the conference. And there you can be able to be a voice of God and give light and influence the decision of who comes to camp meetings, who is the speaker there, what happens there. There are many ways of influencing the organizational structure of the church and bringing changes there. And lastly, there are some churches, because of standing for truth, that were disbanded completely from the structure. And the mistake some of these churches make is to say, okay, because they disbanded us unfairly, we are going to remain like this until we want to fix that. So the spirit sometimes is a vindictive, revengeful spirit. Brother Babuluki was a member of a church that was basically sidelined from the conference in Botswana for years. And they decided to adopt Christ's method until the conference would send pastors to fight them, but they remained respectful and stood their ground until that conference started acknowledging that church. Because in tithe and offering, they were faithful. The tithe was going, the offering was going. Now they are the most watched church in Botswana. They are loved, and the methods of Bible studies that they used are being adopted in the other churches. They were able to build a structure almost the size of this. And Christ's method works. But if they decide that, okay, they're doing this to us, they think this is their church, let them go with their church. See, let them go with their church. We are not small boys. We will not be a walkover. If they had that attitude, we will not be speaking different language now. And what is wrong with separating yourself, setting up your own church structure and registering it, is that others have done it. Read about the Reformed Seventh-day Adventist, who had a reason to do it. And Ellen White says, when you do that, you are going to expose yourself to more advanced delusions. And it has happened with SDA reforms. It has happened with Davidian Seventh-day Adventists. It has happened with Free Seventh-day Adventists. It has happened with so many groups, such that those groups who set up congregational church structure, where the pastor is the one who oversees everything. Once that pastor starts sleeping with those church members in that pure church, how are you going to discipline him? That is the problem, because you don't use the church manual now. You use the Bible. And the pastor says, no, well, I am right. And those churches, after 5 years, they split. And then after they split, who's going to have the money? There's that fighting in court, there's that and then they go and start another one, and that group splits again. And then there are a lot of splinters because it's a collection of people who have a critical spirit and judgmental. And they're getting annoyed by simple things. But why did you add salt to the beans? That's the problem. I can't stay in this church. This is against cancer. And they are very passionate zealots that are all congregating together. That's why there's a danger of splitting.
Thank you so much for that. Now, in light of that, we're trying to see how we can relate with our church and how we can deal with these issues that is taking place in our church. And we've been given an example of how the church can actually be, how you can be that change that you want to see in your church. But I was trying to bring in this change. I probably got a position in the church. I became a deacon and elder, and I started enforcing these truths within the church to bring revival and reformation. And I got disfellowshipped. In fact, my disfellowship was not even according to the protocol of the church. Now I'm stuck. They don't want me to do anything. They disfellowshipped me unfairly so. What do I now do? Yes, Brother David.
I actually just want to mention something from the previous point.
Oh,
if
yes,
that's
okay.
There's a tendency that I have noticed. I've seen it in myself and I've seen it in others, and it's this tendency to label people. So when you come into a church and you see how they dress and how they talk and the music that they have and all these things, in your mind, you label them, these are liberals, right? These are apostates or whatever.
The rebels.
And he's used these labels before. So, and then we label ourselves as present truth or as conservatives or the remnant or whatever. And just something from a secular standpoint, so like from a psychological standpoint, if you look at what happened during COVID-19, there was debate about should we have the vaccine or not. And the moment people began to express concern about the healthfulness or the safety of the vaccines, you started hearing labels. You started hearing terms like conspiracy theorist or anti-vaxxers or unscientific or fanatics or whatever. And what that tended to do was to end all conversation. All dialogue was immediately brought to an end because you can't talk to someone who's not interested in science, if you understand what I'm saying. So the moment we use labels, we typically are ending all discussion. That is a liberal, and what you're basically doing is you're putting that person into a condition that cannot change. So what I prefer to do is not to use labels. I just say, he's an Adventist, I'm an Adventist, we're at different levels of understanding, and I don't know why that they're at that state. I don't know why they are dressing the way that they are dressing. I don't know why they sing or listen to the music the way they listen to it, and I can't read their hearts. I'm not God. So the attitude that we ought to have is an attitude of assuming innocence, assuming ignorance, but not in a way of I'm coming to them as a teacher who knows everything. That's also an attitude we want to avoid. But we want to come to people to, like 1 Corinthians 13 says that love thinks no evil, right? It assumes the best of people. So when we see churches in the state that we see them, we should come with the attitude of compassion, of understanding, rather than of criticism, of judgment, and assuming that they're in rebellion. Because when we say the church is in apostasy, sometimes it may very well be, but how do you know? Because apostasy is intentional rebellion. It's not people who are in ignorance. So I think the attitude that we ought to have is an attitude of compassion and understanding. And one of the things that can help that or make it harder is the labels that we use. I say we don't use these labels. I say we should remove these words out of our language and just say, that's my Adventist brother, and he needs some help.
Brother Ashley, I want us to thank you so much for that comment, Brother David. I also want us just to briefly touch on the issues of disfellowshipment. Just briefly, our time is now finished, but if we can, let's just touch on it.
Okay.
Brother Ashley.
I've never been disfellowshipped myself. But I would like to believe that there are structures in the church. And remember what Brother Luafo mentioned earlier, is that those structures are there to protect the flock. Say a member is unfairly disfellowshipped from church, there are structures that they can appeal to. They can appeal to the conference, they can appeal again to the church board that disfellowshipped them. They can appeal to the union, they can appeal to the division. So there are those structures, and those structures are there to protect us as the church, because we are the ones that put them there, in essence.
Thanks so much, Brother Law.
Yes, and I think on YouTube, Pastor Simdu Mr. Poso shares a testimony. They were disfellowshipped from the church, and there was even a pastor who was preaching and calling them, Masupatsila. These are the pathfinders. That's what Masupatsila literally means.
Yeah.
To point the path of righteousness. These are the ones who are directing you. This is the way you should walk in it. Anyway, because of their attitude and spirit, with time, they were reinstated into membership. What determines whether you are reinstated or not? God's providence will work things out for you. And like David is saying, some of the people are sincerely ignorant and they don't know what they are fighting. And by your Christ-like spirit, you may win them to the Lord.
Thank you so much. As we just wrap up this discussion, for those that just came in, we are discussing the subject is the Church of God, Babylon. And we are just concluding now. And should you have any questions, please write them down, and then we can answer them in the Q&A series. As we wrap up, I just want us to touch briefly on this idea that if I'm disfellowshipped, it's fine. My membership is in heaven. So therefore, I don't have to try and retouch myself with this thing, because heaven knows my heart. My name is in the book of life, not in the church record, so I don't need that.
Yeah.
So as you answer, can you just briefly involve that and try and answer that as
All
well?
right. Ashley said that he has never experienced that. I've experienced it myself. Yeah. And with that, what I saw is, at the time it happened, I had already moved to another town working as a Bible worker there. And the church that Rob spoke of, when it became organized as a church, because they had basically neglected it, not to try to do anything with it. When it became organized, they said, look, and by the time I came there, actually, I said, guys, this is my situation. Right now, I know that I'm under censure because of 1, 2, 3. They said, well, the reasons, I even showed them the letter. I explained to them, these are the reasons. They said, okay, we have something similar. Basically, last story short, they attended meetings like this. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah, meetings like this, where people want to learn the truth and they go and they learn together without any organizational structure, instruction that go and to this place and such and such. So I experienced that. And when I went to that place, did Bible work, even when I was essentially doing Bible work in my hometown, such that even today, when I go back to my hometown, they say, do you have anything to say? Sabbath school, no, people who are supposed to do it, they're not around. Can you take the class and teach the class? The church that I worked with ended up adopting me into their membership. They said, look, we don't see any reason for you to be rebaptized, because if you get rebaptized, you are still going to do the same thing that got you kicked out, attending such meetings, because that was the whole issue. Yeah, and you have abusing baptism if you do that. So that was provision from my side, so that God was leading in that way. So what is the attitude that I have toward the church, my home church? I have no ill feelings towards them, and that helped me, because interacting with them, some of them are even my relatives. You see, so I don't have to have one attitude at home and another attitude at church, so that it's just a lack of understanding, and sometimes maybe people are being personal. I don't know, so I just take it that these people, they didn't understand what's going on. They don't understand the situation. Don't understand what is going on. So, and when you have that attitude, they welcome you back, and they can see that they made a mistake, and they can actually say, we are sorry that we did that to you.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Brother Love, I'll ask you to, if there's no more comments, Brother David?
Just very briefly, the one is earlier on it was mentioned that one of the issues with like separating ourselves is the fact that we can't have an influence upon the church. And as far as I know, the policy of the church is that if you're going to hold office, you have to have membership. So just for practical reasons, if you want to have an influence, a lasting, quote unquote, official influence, you need church membership.
Yeah.
So you can't just dismiss it and say, oh, well, my membership is in heaven.
Yeah.
It'll be a lot harder for you to have a lasting influence upon the church. The second thing I wanted to say is we've spent a lot of time talking about pastors who are opposing the truth, but I must say from my own experience, I've met a lot who love the truth. They may not always have a full understanding of the truth, but they're very good people, godly people. I've got friends in high positions. I shouldn't say it like that. They're prominent people, and they are not corrupt. They love the truth. In fact, they love what we would call present truth. And they are in those positions trying to do all they can to basically lead the church into reformation and into revival. So we sometimes when we have I'll just use the example, like I have an interaction with someone and they happen to be Zulu, and then I meet another Zulu, and they also the first one I have a bad experience with him, and then the second Zulu he steals money from me, and then the third Zulu he beats me up or something like that, and then what do I do? All Zulus. They're terrible people, right? And then I meet a nice Zulu, and he treats me kindly, and I think, nah, he can't be a Zulu. He must have grown up in Botswana or something. And so we don't want to, the expression in English is to paint everyone with the same brush. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? We don't want to assume that all pastors are like that, because they're not. There are many very godly people who love the truth and the Lord just as much as we do.
Amen.
Our time has run up. Thank you so much to our panel for, I hope they clarified a lot of things that might have been confusing you in your Seventh Adventist experience. But I think what we can all get from this is that our attitude towards the church really needs to change. There's a statement that I read. It says, it's not Ellen White. It says that if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at will change. So just adopt a different mindset on trying to implement the truth in your church. And I believe that God will guide you, and God will tell you exactly how you need to go about making certain decisions. So thank you so much for being attentive and for engaging with us as we were discussing this very controversial subject. Should we not have discussed the things that you might be facing in your personal experience? Write down your questions. Also, we have a bookstore at the back. Obviously, we're not selling books today, but the books that we have speaks about these issues and gives scenarios of people that have faced unfair dismissal from the church and whatever situations that the church did to them. We have a book at the back called The Embattled Church. It will address most of the things that we've discussed here. So please, before you leave, do visit the bookstore and get some content that can educate you on how you need to now relate with the condition of our church. I believe that our attitude toward the church should be the way Christ dealt with the condition of his church, is to love the church despite. Even if the church has to crucify you, you still say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing. And you get back to Jerusalem and you tarry there and you work for God's people until Jesus comes again.